Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Thank you for tuning in, and if you like what you hear, please leave your rating or review on your chosen podcast platform. We thank you in advance, as it also helps new listeners discover our show. In this episode, we are joined by Una Wright, the founder and executive director of Youth Speak, an organization promoting mental health and well-being to increase the resiliency of youth facing challenges. Diana and Una begin their discussion by examining how self-awareness and accountability are the first steps toward empathy. They continue their conversation by suggesting that successfully leading others is looking for someone's strengths in unexpected areas and providing them with opportunities and places to demonstrate those strengths. They also discuss that teamwork can prosper when a culture of mentorship is organically allowed to happen. They conclude their discussion by considering if one can acquire confidence from the result of taking action with a mindset shift of viewing failures as opportunities. Now let's have a conversation.
Hello, everyone. This is Diana Kowarski, and welcome again to the Soft Skills Salon podcast. Delighted to be with you for another episode. We are going to continue our mandate of speaking with a diversity of voices, novices, and experts, and figuring out how soft skills can make a difference to your work, your teams, your career, your organization, none of which in a particular order, maybe all of the above. Each of our episodes is based on a series of questions that have been selected from our Soft Skills Impact Questionnaire. That questionnaire contains 15 questions, which each of our guests have a chance to peruse and pre-select a handful of questions that they find of particular interest or that resonate with them. And as we say every time on the Soft Skills Salon podcast, conversation is the currency of communication. So let's have another conversation. And this episode's conversation is with Una Wright. And Una Wright is the founder of Youth Speak Performance Charity. Her passion is to give meaning to her personal challenges, which inspired the making of Youth Speak and her well-being self-care workshops. Within her family, Una experienced many challenges related to mental health, including the loss of 2 children. She has made it her personal mission to give a message to others of empowerment and to embrace their own story through coping strategies and a positive mindset. Youth Speak is an organization that provides leadership training to youth with personal experience related to mental health, bullying, and/or addiction to provide youth-led interactive assemblies and workshops for primary grades to post-secondary parents, educators, and other caring adults throughout the Greater Toronto Area and Southern Ontario. To date, having reached over 250,000 students, parents, and educators and other caring adults with messages of hope, inclusivity, empathy, and resilience. Welcome, Una. I am so pleased to have you here.
Thanks, Diana, and I'm very, very pleased to be here.
There's a lot to be said for soft skills, whether it is youth-oriented or career-oriented, and or how it can be a set of skills that are involved potentially in how it is we are proactive or reactive. The word mindset and, of course, empathy, those 2 words, mindset and empathy, really jumped out at me from your bio. And I'm certain that if only because of those 2 words, in addition to all of your experience that you bring, that we're going to have a great conversation in this episode. Mm-hmm. So the first and starting point for that conversation is our question number 5, which reads, where have you seen or experienced empathy in your career? What comes to mind, Una?
Well, most definitely, like you said, empathy and mindset. So in terms of empathy, it really is the backbone of the creation of Youth Speak on many levels. So, as you mentioned in my bio, it's Youth Speak was inspired by lived experience within my own family. So, when you've been through or going through big challenges in your life. Sometimes there's a kind of almost a lack of empathy towards yourself, really. And so I discovered kind of along that journey that giving a meaning and a voice to those challenges helps to create that kind of sense of self-compassion, self-empathy, and forgiveness, and all the other wonderful things that go along with healing, as well. Instinctively knew that I could provide that opportunity for youth to do the same. Youth who have experienced challenges, whether it's bullying or mental health challenges, racism, whatever it is that they've experienced. There was a need to help them give a meaning to their stories, to create that self-compassion, empathy, but also to give a message to others.
Right.
To treat each other with greater empathy and kindness.
I'm interested in that turn of phrase that you've used, right? The importance of empathy towards yourself or oneself. And in working with several other guests on this podcast, one of my observations has been this undercurrent theme around self-awareness. So I'm not certain if self-awareness is necessarily a part of this idea of empathy towards yourself, but I think it might be. Am I off base there, Una?
No, I think you're dead on, because self-awareness really is the first kind of step, if you want to use the word step, in any growth, change, introspection. It's just you don't know what you don't know. Right. And you can't do anything about what you don't know. So I think self-awareness is a key, and that kind of looking within, looking around, and noticing. And then you've got something to work with. Whether or not you do, that's a whole nother kind of conversation. But that self-awareness,
It's interesting that as well, because you're right. There is a potential product at the different stages of self-awareness. I don't know if it ever is over. I know I'm still figuring mine out. I can't say that I'm done. I don't know if anyone ever really is. However, at certain points, and the journey of self-awareness does give us a product of either some perspective, perhaps, or acceptance, or maybe even just a new question. And so I find that curious in that product, whatever it may be, that is the result of a process of self-awareness, that then there's the opportunity to, absorb that or perhaps act on it, right?
Yeah, 100%. So really, once you become aware, you're in a sense accountable, right? Whether or not you do anything, that's up to you. But you're really you become accountable to yourself, to someone else, whatever that awareness brings you to. And so an accountability usually involves some kind of effort or change on your part, whether it's to view things differently or to behavior change or whatever it might be. So I look at it very much as a self-awareness, accountability, and then that's where that empathy piece comes in, because often when we become aware and we try to be accountable, we can be hard on ourselves at that point, right? And that's really where that self-compassion, empathy does need to come in, because it's so easy to kind of beat ourselves up for where we're not in life.
Absolutely. And as someone, I've spent a small amount of my career working with youth, certainly perhaps on the older end of youth, working with undergrads and so on. And at the same time, being a parent myself, what I hear is that immediate connection to a mindset. And mindset for me is at the very beginning, the idea of meta thinking. In other words, thinking about what you think about, which I know so many people who are, perhaps a youth at heart, but who are with a longer tenure on the surface of the planet, still grapple with and spend time perhaps avoiding thinking about the thinking that they're doing. What do you think of that approach in terms of empathy, mindset, self-compassion? Where's the overlap there with mindset?
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to speak to your idea about it being a lifetime journey, and it really, really is. It's and because sometimes the resistance of that can get in our way, right? But it's almost kind of, you get to that age where it's like, okay, this is not, it's forever, right? It's,
Right.
I'm never going to have it all figured out. And there's such a wisdom in that, and years on the planet to discover that. But I think it comes down to a decision often, right? It's like that crossroads, right? Like we can't change our past story. We can't change, where we are up to this point. But we can change our future story by changing our mindset. So for example, when we lost our children and all the various other challenges we experienced, it was a decision very much that I can decide how I'm going to respond to what's happening in my life and how I'm going to see myself or decide who I am in my own story. And that is something we can change. We can change the story we tell ourselves about who we are in our own story. And that is that meta thinking. It's that you're right. It's that, almost stepping outside of our own life and looking in, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love the language there around story and narrative. That really resonates with me and a lot of the work that I do, because in a corporate setting, oftentimes I'm asked to frame soft skills in relationship to control. And I'm putting control in great big air quotes here for the audience and for myself as well. And the idea of a narrative and or a story suggests to me that while we can, of course, be our own protagonist or our own villain, depending upon the day or the moment, but that we do have the opportunity to craft the story. And for me, I like to think of it as a comic strip, right? And perhaps that's telling you about my own tenure on the planet. I'm not talking about a Magna or any of those modern ones. But if you think about a comic strip, it has these individual cells, and the story can change dramatically from one cell to the next, but they're all part of the same strip. Mm-hmm. So that's how I've, wrapped my head around some of the teaching I do around that. And I think by proxy, also some of how I think about my own self-awareness. It sounds to be in some alignment with your own approach, Una.
Yeah. It definitely does. And the kind of cool thing about, I like that comic strip idea, because, if you look at that comic strip in kind of in retrospect and look back at it, you might not be able to change kind of what's on there. Right. But you can change how you see yourself within it and how you will see your future self. Right. Like, what are we telling ourselves about who we are? Mm-hmm. Based on those experiences, whether they're things that we may have done incorrectly or need to change, could have changed, or whether it's something that was done to us, no matter what, is who are we based on that, or who are we telling ourselves who we are,
and if
right?
we link all of that back to the original question, right? Where have you seen or experienced empathy? It sounds to me that inward focus or that intrapersonal focus, it starts with self.
Yes, it all starts with self. And when self, when you're investing in yourself, then you just show up better for the others around you, right? And that's it's an important message I give, like in self-care workshops I do. It's an important message that our youth give to other youth, right? It's that, that self-forgiveness and self-love, discovering self-love and acceptance and all those kind of important pieces. But you're not going to have much to ripple outwards if you're not okay with who you are, right? And it is a journey, okay? You're right. It's not just kind of, yes, you're okay with yourself. No, you're not, right? It's a continual.
No switch. There isn't a magic flip of a switch. I was looking for the switch.
There we go. I think we've all been looking for the switch, right?
Yeah. No, I understand. I absolutely. So let's continue with the idea then around self. And your next question perhaps has an extension to that. It was, what does success leading others look like to you? So how do we get there in your thinking?
Mm-hmm. So that actually does segue nicely, because for me, working with youth, especially, right? And especially people who have had faced kind of big challenges in their lives, right? Like I have. It's looking for kind of strength in unexpected places. It's one of my biggest joys is watching their self-discovery. Things that they didn't know that they were, that they had strengths in, or that they were good at, or that they could kind of thrive in. So that's a big part of kind of the work that we do.
Can you give an example? I love that turn of phrase, looking for strengths in unexpected places. Is there a particular example you could give me?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind that I don't think I'll share on this podcast, but
no problem.
Yeah, let's just see. Okay, with somebody who's maybe, has leadership skills that they're using in the wrong way. I could put it like that. Okay, leadership skills that they're using for not good, right? Sure. Instead of good. Because they're just misdirected, misguided, being misused, whatever. But seeing those leadership skills in that person that they're not even aware of, right? Okay. And honing those and providing opportunities within our organization for them to access those and discover them and recognize, wow, I'm a leader and I had no idea I was a leader. So I didn't feel like a leader, right? I felt like it was, So to just shift kind of the focus. And then really playing to the strengths too. That's another piece of it, right? So it's that self-discovery journey, allowing opportunity for that, but also really playing, like trying to find projects that are needed, for somebody to take on, and matching those with the person who's the perfect fit for it, right? So really playing to the strengths.
Then, if we go back to the question, success leading others, I'm hearing a few themes, looking for strengths in perhaps unexpected places, as you said, providing opportunities for application of those strengths, looking for a means by which for someone to demonstrate some of their abilities or capabilities. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's a great summary.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say also kind of a balance. Something I've discovered is a balance of autonomy and kind of guidance and direction, right? Who some folks prefer a lot of autonomy. And so where's that balance of, providing as much of that as possible to keep them engaged and excited about work. At the same time, there's some reporting and accountability. And some folks just prefer a little bit more structure and guidance, right? So finding that too, I think is kind of an important part of leadership success is not having people fit into your kind of mold, but working more collaboratively with creating a culture that works to bring out the best in everyone.
So at that cultural level, then, how do you go about actually living the fine tuning of that balance? What is it that you actually do to figure out this individual excels with this approach versus that individual would prefer an alternate approach?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the first thing I thought of, and I thought, well, I don't actually do that. It's just ask, I suppose, what you prefer, right? But I tend to just really slowly take the time to get to know people, right? I try to model it myself. I believe that I create an environment, a culture of openness, that open door kind of policy as best I can, and just openness and a little bit of fun, and just getting to know people at a kind of a personal level to a certain degree, right? So creating a warm environment so people feel safe, and then you get just a little bit more information, and over time you get to know, because I suppose the question asking that may not necessarily work anyway, because not everybody's going to know their own style, right? So it's a journey. Yeah.
So in working with youth, did any of that become influenced during this COVID era in getting to know people, or?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. There was definitely a learning curve of being virtual, and our team technically, from a technical standpoint, they did a fantastic job. They led the way for sure to pivoting to online, right? And then coming back to in person now has been a bit of a learning curve again, right? So getting adjustment and learning curve for sure.
My
But
understanding is that Youth Speak is about preferably in-person speaking engagements, or is
yeah,
that wrong?
historically it always was in person. It was never virtual. And now it's, we're offering both. Most schools are choosing in person. That's just, yeah. They're
Well,
just
there's
saying
a person-to-person element here around story, isn't there?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And just being with people in, the dynamics and the energy that happens when, a large group of people gather in a large space. And, there's just something quite different than being online.
There is. I don't know if we actually have a word for that yet, but I agree with you. There absolutely is. There absolutely is. I'm also not sure if this next question is even using the right word. Our next question is, how have you created teamwork during your career so far? And teamwork is a remarkably slippery fish in terms of what that can actually mean. Nonetheless, I am interested to hear, how have you created teamwork so far in your career?
So I often use the analogy of a sports team, right? Where there's this sense of kind of we-ness and common goal, common mission. So that I just find it often works, that analogy. So I use it often to just, have each other's backs, to create that kind of sense of we-ness and common goal, that we sometimes have to step into a role where we're unfamiliar. I'll never forget, I think it was last year, and I can't remember what team it was, but they were short on goalies. All their goalies were injured. And the Zamboni driver, who was a retired goalie, stepped in. It was all over kind of social media. It was just one of those gems of a story that this person got the opportunity. But that's, that's the true meaning of teamwork, right? Is that everybody's always there for each other no matter what. And you just kind of take that positive risk. So that is one way that we create teamwork, celebrating successes. For sure. At our team leads meeting every week, we celebrate a success, and anybody on the team can bring forward a success that they know. So they could be small things or big. A mentorship, like creating that kind of culture where, experienced youth on our team nurture and support new coming in. There's just fluidity of mentorship that just seems to happen naturally. It's not a formal kind of, interaction, but it just happens naturally.
How do you think that happens naturally? That's an interesting piece to teamwork. Sometimes we have an environment, if there has been a culture where, as you said, the sports analogy of having each other's back is pervasive. And it sounds to me that you're describing that is the culture in which you have your organization working. That sometimes there are pieces of manifesting that culture, like informalized mentorship that can arise, as you suggest, organically. How do you think that happens, and why?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I think for us, we're a small team. So I think it's easier, maybe. I don't know if I'm undermining kind of the value of it, but we're a small team, so it just happens. It's almost like you gotta because you're kind of happy, right?
It's very obvious if someone is let down, right?
Right. Yes.
Or complex machine or multiple locations. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And it does make people feel good, right? To be asked to support someone, or just, if it happens very organically, like you said. So I'm not really sure, as you grow, as an organization grows, I think, when, and as structures kind of become more in place, people tend to kind of, slot themselves into those. So I think you might have to be more conscious about creating mentorship more formally, maybe.
It's an organization, to my understanding, that has volunteers as well as staff, or am I
there? So our youth facilitators and speakers are all paid staff.
Okay.
Yes, it's a big job they have. There's a big commitment. They're all there. It's a regular job for them.
Great. Great.
So yeah. So there's a big component of training and all that. So we do have volunteers in terms of our board of directors and for fundraising events and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of. Absolutely. And so in terms of your leadership then in the organization, and certainly how you have created teamwork, from a leader perspective, is there any other thought that you have around either your experience around team or lack thereof, or if you could wave a magic wand as a leader?
I think to maintain that culture, to be able to maintain that culture of just mentorship organically happening, right? Yeah. And once again, go back to that sports team analogy, right? I think it does happen organically on a sports team. And so, we haven't faced that yet, but you know what? I think it is one of those things to be proactive in it, is to formalize it, right? Yeah.
So you use the word maintenance, and I always have the same response when I hear maintenance, and that is the role of repetition.
Right.
So let me ask you that. Have you identified or have you had any thought about the role of repetition as a leader to bring that teamwork, if only through your relationship with the sports analogy? How has the role of repetition been a part of the maintenance piece, or has it for you?
Right. I hadn't really thought about that. I guess repetition in building any habit or maintaining any habit is a really important aspect of it, right? It's, and just kind of, I think of the neural networks in our brain, right? It's repetition that kind of helps us to kind of create those superhighways in our brain. So definitely, yeah, that's a good point. Definitely we can do the same within an organization, right? If you continue to do it over and over, it's going to be so embedded that it would be hard to change it if you ever did want to change it, right? So embedding those good. And
there's comfort there, right? There's comfort in knowing Una's talking about us as a sports team again. All right, that's motivating. I know exactly what she means. Okay, I know how this works. Hey, there's Una doing that again. All right, I know exactly what that means. I know what we're supposed to be doing. And that repetition isn't often much of an appeal, doesn't have much of an appeal on the surface. However, just as you suggested, right, those neural pathways are embedded through attention and through habit forming.
Yeah.
Right. And it is. Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good point, because I've never really thought about it that way, but thought about it from personal habits and things, but I've never thought about it in terms of the culture of the organization. And that's a good point.
So this last question we're going to talk about is one that I'll share with you has been probably the most popular question in this questionnaire. And it is one that I confess fully, I added in there because I couldn't come up with another one.
Okay, there we go.
And so it's a short one, and it's one that had connection to my own immediate teaching that I had been doing. And I'm just privately tickled that it has taken off. And so I'm delighted that we'll be speaking about this one together. And it is, how do you define confidence?
Right. It's one of those questions that I was thought about it a little bit before I checked that one off, because I thought, okay, it's a big one. It's kind of a loaded, right? Yeah. I find it's loaded because we all want lots of it, but I think most of us kind of really, I'm speaking in very general terms, but I feel very safe to say that most of us, I think, battle a little bit with self-doubt, like that opposite of confidence, right? Where it's very fluid thing. You can be very confident one area of your life or one, project or whatever, task or, relationship or whatever it might be, versus another. But I think it is a loaded thing for sure. But I chose it because of that, right? I thought it's an important conversation to have, and it's validating, I think, for anybody who feels like, I wish I had more confidence. or projects like they do, but inside perhaps they don't, that imposter syndrome kind of thing, to have and to feel like, okay, I'm not alone in this, right? So that's why I did check that one off. But I think, in terms of defining it, it very much goes back to that mindset thing, right? It's that self-talk, that's whether it's positive or negative self-talk, that's a big, big aspect of, or how it shows up when we're not feeling confident in something, right? Is it shows up in our talk. So it's that tuning in again, that self-awareness piece.
Your experience working with youth, has there been any learnings that you've taken away about self-talk in particular?
Yes. So just through conversations, really, creating that safe space for them to come forward and say, I'm really, nervous about speaking. I'm this, whatever it might be. Definitely in terms of the coaching aspect of our work, a lot of reaffirming to them, the positives of what they did, and that kind of, compassion about the growth opportunity and the journey. That positive risk-taking thing, right? It's a big part of confidence too, and something that we kind of address. I don't know if the word address is correct, but the endeavor of speaking in front of a group about your personal story is a risk-taking endeavor, right? Certainly. So that's definitely a huge aspect of it. And I think for anybody who's tried to build confidence, pushing that kind of envelope a little bit and taking positive risks in ways that are, healthy and will support building confidence.
Absolutely. And, I'm hearing some echoes in terms of some of the work that I do around presentation skills and around storytelling. And one of my most recent considerations around confidence, maybe perhaps is of interest to you in this conversation, and that it's, in part, I've noticed over the years that confidence can be just as much a result of having taken even a small action, not necessarily a risk, but perhaps a risk. Doesn't need to be jumping out of an airplane. It can be left foot in front of right foot for some of us, right? There's no judgments, and we all have our own stories, as you said. And that the confidence that one can feel often is the result, not the preamble or the precursor, but that follows having taken that little tiny step, or I love the turn of phrase you said of a positive risk-taking. And at the other end, suddenly we're feeling something that we weren't feeling before. It can be very different than some approaches that ask people to sort of thump their own chests and to muster that confidence, whatever that means, or to strike a power pose of some sort, and then engage in the action. So I'm not suggesting that I have a causal equation here that is soundproof, but I have seen it as a product, confidence on the other side, more and more. Does that connect with any of your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I like power poses, by the way, just as a side note.
Sure.
But anyway, absolutely. I think it's very self-defined or needs to be self-defined. And maybe that's where some of us might kind of go off the rails a little bit, or at times is looking for, that validation from others. So it's definitely needs to be self-defined, because you're right. Those small steps can give people that little ding right in the brain, and to feel good about themselves for something like a small decision, or a small action towards whatever it might be, a greater goal or whatever it might be. So and turning failures into opportunities is another one I think helps to build confidence. So it's that mindset thing again, right? When there's there is a dip and it kind of throws our confidence a little bit, that we look at that differently and as an opportunity to learn, as painful as that can be sometimes. That in itself, just viewing it differently, I think can build confidence, right? Even if there's no behavior change yet, right?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And that's that Carol Dweck idea of the growth mindset.
Growth
versus
mindset.
fixed
Yes.
mindset. And that magic 3-letter word of yet. I'm not there yet. I haven't finished yet. I'm not the master of it yet. I don't have it yet. It's a big deal.
Yes, it is.
I think that's a really, really big deal. And certainly not going anywhere anytime soon, whether you call it mindset or self-talk or self-awareness. I'm interested more and more in these conversations that I've had and have the privilege of meeting so many people in this podcast, that it's those underlying concepts, regardless of whether we come at it from being a public speaker or from an academic or someone who's in finance or someone who works with youth. There really are some core concepts that all are remarkably similar, which doesn't dilute
100%.
the specializations and the ways in which people come to them by any stretch. However, I am seeing that common point more and more. I do need to follow up though. Why do you like the power poses? And what do you like?
I'm a big believer in kind of the mind-body link, right? And where you may or may not be able to make shifts in your mind, because sometimes that's very hard. They're very embedded. You can do that through your body, right? Whether it's deep breathing or power pose or whatever it might be, that you can make those shifts or trigger that shift.
I hear you, and I'm so glad I followed up, because I agree completely with you that there's, perhaps this goes back to my comments before of how I'm often asked to make a connection to control, again in big air quotes. However, for many of us, in some way, shape, or form, we have control over how we can indeed manipulate, if not our whole bodies, some part of our bodies, right? And that can make a great leap towards that self-awareness, that mind-body connection, as you just suggested. So 4 questions up and 4 questions down. Thank you so much, Una Wright, for joining us today at the Soft Skills Salon podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
You too. It's been really a lot of fun. So thank you, Diana, so much.
Take care.
Okay, you too.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode, and remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.